In the Arctic, war wasn't loud. It was silent and slow. No cheering crowds. No medals pinned to uniforms. No immortal speeches echoing across capitals. Just months of darkness. Walls of snow that swallowed men whole. An enemy you could not see until it was too late. This is the war the world forgot. The Arctic front of World War II. A battlefield carved not into maps or textbooks, but into the frostbitten flesh of the soldiers who endured it. When we think of World War II, the mind leaps to names etched into memory. Normandy, Stalingrad, El Alamein, Iwo Jima. The maps of history books are crowded with thick black arrows sweeping across Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific. Great offenses, decisive turning points, iconic battles. But above those crowded maps, high in the white space where the paper seems almost empty, there was another war. It had no grand name in the headlines. No single decisive day that students would memorize. It was a war fought where the sun disappeared for months, and the night lasted so long that the stars seemed frozen in place. Beyond the Arctic Circle, German, Finnish, and Soviet soldiers fought not only each other, but the land itself, a frozen enemy more unrelenting than any army. Summer in the Arctic was endless daylight. The sun refused to set, glaring for 24 straight hours, bleaching snowfields until it hurt to look at them. The snow turned to boggy marsh. Boots sank ankle-deep in black muck. Mosquitoes and black flies swarmed in clouds, so thick that soldiers wrapped scarves around their heads just to breathe. Winter was the opposite, eternal night. Darkness swallowed everything. Temperatures fell to levels where steel could splinter, and skin could blacken in minutes. Every breath seared the lungs. Every movement drained the body. The soldiers who fought here never saw cheering crowds. They would never march down boulevards lined with flags. Their war was fought out of sight, out of mind, and when it ended, it was almost forgotten. It began in the summer of 1941 with Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union. To the south, massive armies clashed at Kiev, Smolensk, and later Stalingrad. But far to the north, another objective glinted like a prize in the snow. Murmansk was no ordinary port. Thanks to the warm currents of the Atlantic, it was ice-free year-round. It became the Soviet Union's lifeline to the west. Through it poured Allied Lend-Lease supplies. Tanks, trucks, planes, food, fuel, ammunition. If Murmansk fell, the Soviet Union's northern artery would be cut. The Red Army, already straining against the German advance, might collapse. To take it, the Germans dispatched their Gebirgsjäger, elite mountain troops, alongside Finnish ski battalions who knew the land. On paper, the plan seemed simple. Strike through northern Norway and Finland, cut the Murmansk railway, and strangle the port city into submission. But paper maps do not show blizzards, frozen rivers, or avalanches. The Arctic had other plans. The first thing the soldiers noticed was not the cold, but the silence. In most war zones, the air was alive with sound. Distant artillery, shouting officers, engines grinding, the constant roar of machinery. Here, there was only the wind, a slow moaning that curled around the peaks. Even armies moved like ghosts. Snow muffled every step, every shouted command. A column of men could march just beyond the tree line and leave behind nothing but faint indentations. In the powder, in summer, the silence was broken by swarms of insects that hummed like a living fog. In winter, it was broken only by the sharp crack of branches snapping under snow or the sudden scream of wind rolling down from the Barents Sea. To the men, it felt less like war and more like exile. The first real battles weren't against the Soviets or the Germans. They were against frostbite. German soldiers, many from Bavaria and Austria, thought they knew winter. They wrapped scarves around their faces until only their eyes showed. But they quickly learned how little they understood. Wet boots froze solid. Exposed skin turned black in hours. Sweat, from even the smallest exertion, froze into armor that could kill a man in his sleep. The Finns shook their heads at these mistakes. They had grown up skiing through forests, reading snow like a book. They kept their feet dry, built snow shelters in minutes, and taught the Germans how to survive. The Soviets were better prepared still. Their quilted uniforms, felt boots, and padded coats were primitive but effective. They knew the rule: never let sweat freeze. Never walk alone in a whiteout. Never trust the ice on a lake. At -40 degrees Celsius, even metal turned against its masters. Touching a rifle barrel with bare skin could tear the flesh away. Machine gun bolts froze solid, so soldiers carried them under their coats to keep them warm. Bread froze into bricks that needed to be chopped with axes. Soup turned to ice before it could be eaten. A joke circulated among Soviet troops: the real cooks here are the men who can keep soup warm long enough to swallow it. For the wounded, the Arctic was a death sentence. A man shot in the chest at Stalingrad might be carried to a hospital within hours. Here, a wounded soldier might be dragged on a sled for days before reaching even a field station. Blood froze in bandages. Surgical knives stuck to skin. Many simply drifted into unconsciousness and never woke again. Some patrols carried no stretchers at all. A wounded comrade was a weight that could doom everyone. Men made terrible choices in the snow, whispering prayers as they left friends behind. To the white silence, and still orders came. Patrols went out, trenches were manned. On most fronts, battles were measured in cities captured, tank columns stretching for miles. On the Arctic front, battles were measured in whispers. Here, survival was movement. To stay still too long in the cold was as fatal as a sniper's bullet. Patrols moved in small units, 6, maybe 8 men, gliding silently on skis through birch forests or across frozen rivers. The snow muffled everything, but it also betrayed them. A single dark silhouette on a white plain could be seen for hundreds of meters. Finnish ski patrols became ghosts in the night. They would glide across the border, cut telephone lines, ambush an isolated outpost, and vanish before dawn. The next day, Soviet artillery would hammer ridges, forcing Germans from dugouts. The Germans mapped every bend in the rivers, every ridge and valley, searching for a gap to the Murmansk railway. But the Soviets knew the land too well. They built decoy bunkers. They laid mines under snowdrifts, across frozen lakes, even in the paths of migrating reindeer. The terrain itself became a weapon. Avalanches were triggered by a single stray artillery shell. Blizzards swallowed whole battalions. One unlucky patrol might stumble blindly into enemy fire, frozen and blinded by snow. Life on the Arctic front was a strange mix of monotony and terror. German soldiers carved dugouts into frozen earth, lining the walls with pine branches to hold back the damp. Soviet troops built Zemlyanka's half-buried log huts, where a single stove could mean life or death. The Finns, experts in the north, built snow shelters so quickly they could disappear into the white whenever danger approached. Food became an obsession. Rations were thin and hunger was constant. Men chewed frozen bread until their jaws ached. They boiled fish pulled from ice holes, roasted hares, squirrels, even crows. The Germans brewed ersatz coffee from roasted barley, a bitter drink, but enough to keep men awake during endless night watches. Even in the depths of war, moments of beauty pierced the silence. On clear nights, the aurora painted the sky in green and purple fire. Soldiers paused, rifles in hand, to watch the heavens ripple. For a moment, war itself seemed to freeze. There were even strange truces. Patrols stumbling upon one another in a blizzard sometimes chose not to fight. Cigarettes, bread, or a flask of vodka might be exchanged before both sides faded back into the dark, but mercy was rare. Most encounters ended with the snow stained red. Through it all, Murmansk endured. Allied convoys sailed the Arctic Ocean, braving U-boats and Luftwaffe bombers to deliver supplies. Ships arrived coated in ice, so thick sailors hacked it off to keep from capsizing. On land, the Murmansk Railway became the lifeblood of the Soviet North. Germans and Finns launched raid after raid to cut it. In early 1942, an entire German battalion vanished in a snowstorm before reaching their objective. Half froze to death. The survivors emerged frostbitten, many permanently crippled. Still, the railway held. Supplies flowed south to the Soviet armies. Murmansk became a symbol, battered, bombed, but unbroken. By 1944, the war was changing. The Soviets had turned the tide at Stalingrad and Kursk. Now they turned north in the Petsamo-Kirkines offensive. Soviet forces smashed into German lines, forcing a retreat through northern Finland and Norway. The retreat was as brutal as the advance. Germans destroyed bridges, mined roads, and burned what they could not carry. Smoke curled into the pale sky as entire valleys were put to the torch. The Soviets' victory was not celebrated with parades. Their reward was simply survival. Another winter endured, another front secured. Murmansk still stood. When the war ended in May 1945, the Arctic soldiers returned home, but no one asked them for stories. In the West, headlines celebrated D-Day. Paris, Berlin. In the Soviet Union, glory belonged to Stalingrad, to the march across Poland. The Arctic front faded almost instantly, like snow melting in spring. And yet, it had been their whole war. Decades later, the Arctic remains littered with relics. Rusting helmets poke from the moss. Half-collapsed bunkers sag under ice. Supply sleds lie broken in the tundra. Sometimes, the earth still gives up its dead, a boot sticking from the snow, a rifle half buried in frost. The cold preserves everything, even memory. For those who survived, the Arctic never left. Veterans spoke not of victory, but of endless nights, hunger, the sound of boots crunching on snow. They remembered friends who vanished in blizzards. They remembered how silence could feel like the loudest sound in the world. And yet, even here, there was beauty, the aurora dancing across a frozen sky. The silence so deep it felt holy. The brief moments when enemies saw not uniforms, but men in the history books. The Arctic front is little more than a line on a map, but for the men who fought there, it was the center of the world. They faced not only enemy armies, but a land that punished every mistake. A cold that could steal life in minutes. There were no parades, no immortal speeches, only silence, snow, and the will to endure. If you ever stand in the far north, where the wind never stops, and the night lasts for months, listen closely. You may still hear it, the crunch of boots on frozen ground, the murmur of voices carried on the wind, the ghosts of the war the world forgot.